guys, so the diminished scale is really just two diminished chords stacked or superimposed on top of each other. So for example, the C whole half diminished scale looks like this. And it's really just a C diminished chord superimposed over a D diminished chord. Now this is called an octatonic scale because it has 8 notes. Now similarly, the augmented scale is really just two augmented triads stacked on top of each other. So the C augmented scale sounds like this. And it's really just a C augmented triad stacked on top of an E flat augmented triad. Now this is a hexatonic scale because it's got 6 notes. And it's also called a minor third half step scale because that's the intervals of the scale. So minor third half step, minor third half step, minor third half step. Now, because this scale is symmetrical, that is, the scale consists of repeating intervals, there are just 4 different augmented scales. C, E, and A flat augmented scales all have the same notes. D flat, F, and A augmented scales all have the same notes. D, F sharp, B flat augmented scales have all the same notes. And E flat, G, B augmented scales have all the same notes. And just like the whole half diminished scale can be inverted to create a half whole diminished scale, in theory the minor third half augmented scale can also be inverted to create the half minor third augmented scale, where a C minor third half step scale is exactly the same as an E flat half step minor third scale. Now, while not as common as the diminished scale, the augmented scale can occasionally be found in jazz, especially during improvisations. And this scale is particularly interesting because it's symmetrical and because it's got both a major third and a minor third. Now, if we take the C augmented scale, then we can build the chords C major 7 sharp 5, C minor major 7, C major 7, and the C augmented triad out of the notes of that scale. Therefore, we can use this scale over any of those chords. So for example, now we can also use the C augmented scale over any C dominant 7 chord. And it creates a very altered scale kind of sound, or even a blues scale kind of sound because of that E flat. Now, if we have a look at every note of the C augmented scale with reference to the C7 chord, we find that we have a 1, a sharp 9, a 3, a 5, a flat 13, and a major 7. Now, obviously the major 7 doesn't quite fit over a dominant chord because dominant chords have the flat 7. So this is technically an avoid note and should generally be passed over quickly and not sort of emphasized or sat on, because it creates a little bit of a clash. Now, as I explained in an earlier video, you can use a particular scale over a particular chord if that scale has the 3rd and the 7th of that chord. So you don't even necessarily need to have the root of the chord in the scale. And in fact, you don't even need to necessarily have both the 3rd and the 7th in the scale. Even if you have just one of those notes, it'll do. So as a general rule, when working with augmented scales, you can use the augmented scale over any chord that contains an augmented triad. So for example, you could use the C augmented scale over a D7 sharp 11, G flat 7 sharp 11, or B flat 7 sharp 11, an A minor major 7, an F minor major 7, or a D flat minor major 7, and a D minor 9 flat 5, G flat minor 9 flat 5, and B flat minor 9 flat 5. Now, I've got a separate video on avoid notes, so you can check that out if you like. But essentially, they're just notes that sound dissonant when played over a particular chord. But that doesn't mean you can't use this scale over a particular chord. It just means you have to be careful not to sit on an avoid note for too long. You're better off treating an avoid note as a quick passing note. So for example, the E flat over a C minor 7 flat 5 chord will clash, So generally try to move through it quickly, don't sit on it. Similarly, the example I gave earlier, the B over a C7 chord, will also clash. So again, you don't want to emphasize or sit on that note for too long. You just want to kind of move through it or skip it altogether. Now, John Coltrane's One Down, One Up actually uses the augmented scale in the opening bars. Right, so that little melody at the beginning uses a D flat augmented scale, or the D flat minor third half step augmented scale, or more accurately, it uses the inverted C augmented scale, that is the C half step minor third augmented scale. Though I think in the recording it's played from a B flat rather than a C, but that's just a simple transposition. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, a C augmented scale is made up of a C augmented triad superimposed over an E flat augmented triad. But you can also think of the augmented scale as a C major triad superimposed over an E major triad superimposed over an A flat major triad. And so you can arpeggiate these chords in a little run and technically be using the augmented scale. And if you listen to the bridge of the song Hoedown by Oliver Nelson, or the solo of the song Survival of the Fittest by Freddie Hubbard, you'll hear exactly that little run. And so they're both using the augmented scale in those songs. And a very similar run, in fact effectively the same run, can be heard in Oliver Nelson's solo in the song Stolen Moments. And so again, that's using the D flat augmented scale, or the C inverted augmented scale, to improvise over a C minor 7 chord. So have a listen to the song Stolen Moments, which is a lovely minor blues, and listen for that little riff during Oliver Nelson's solo, and it happens at about 5 minutes and 27 seconds in. So the augmented scale was popularized by John Coltrane, Oliver Nelson, and also Michael Brecker. And the most famous example of the augmented scale being used in jazz is precisely in that Oliver Nelson solo in the song Stolen Moments. Now up here in the picture-in-picture, I've put a list of songs which use the augmented scale, so you can go have a listen to them and see if you can spot where they're being used. Otherwise, that's it for me. Thanks a lot for watching again, and as always, feel free to leave any questions or comments. See ya!